School teachers have a warm place in my heart. Two reasons. I'll tell you the second one after the first one. My daughter does sign. She interprets for the deaf. We never could figure out why she elected to learn that and to teach it, except we have one incident where we were at a park, and she was about 6 or 7 years old, and she disappeared. Kids have a habit of doing that, you know. So my wife and I began looking for her. And it was a huge park. It was really a big horse show, and there were barns everywhere. And she was a horse lover, so she could be looking at any horse in the place. Well, we searched and we searched. We couldn't find her anywhere around the barns. And I looked across a little creek that went through the property. And over there were some campers and tents and that sort of thing. And I thought, maybe she wandered over there. So I went over, and sure enough, she was sitting there on a water bucket, and everything in the camp was absolutely silent. But people were standing there doing this. She is absolutely immersed in what they're doing. And we think that was the beginning of her desire to become an interpreter for the deaf. We are influenced in life by so many, many ways. Many of you are teachers because of something that happened in your life that caused you to be a teacher. It may be a family type situation. You're following in mom's footsteps or dad's footsteps or something of that nature. But circumstances really govern our lives. And they're not anticipated. They just happen, and then we get an influence, and we take off in that direction. This teacher, this is a part of the story that's not supposed to be recorded. This teacher was her first year, and she was in the first grade. How many of you teach first grade? Anybody in here? Okay, she was teaching first grade. Can you imagine the nervousness of this young lady? All these little kiddies running around, and how do you control these? So she got up before the class and gave them some orders. You don't speak unless you raise your hand. And you do not get up and leave the room to go to the bathroom unless you raise your hand and say, "May I go to the bathroom?" So she starts the class. One little boy, "May I go to the bathroom?" Sure enough, off he goes. In a few moments, he comes back, and he just gets back, and the second little boy says, "May I go to the bathroom?" Well, she got to do this. Kind of interrupting, but got to do this. So he went out. A few moments, he comes back. He's all excited. "I can't find it. I can't find it." So she said to the first boy, "You know where it is. Take him and show him where it is." So they left together. When they came back, the little boy that took him walked in the room and said, he couldn't find the bathroom. He knew where that was. He just had his shorts on backwards. Usually we go through this procedure, and then we say, "Any questions?" Well, by that time you're already asleep or worn out. But let me reverse that. So let me ask first that if you have any question whatsoever, I know you've Googled it and Wikipedia'd it and all that, so I know that. So if you have any question that you would like to ask me before we start, please do so. Anybody have a question that you thought you might ask afterwards and now you're going to ask forward? The lady right here.
I read that when you were about to land in Iwo Jima, you didn't know how to swim.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever learn how to swim?
Well, that's a little misnomer. I did know how to dog paddle. You know what dog paddling is? Well, that's all I could do because we had no swimming facilities in West Virginia except creeks, and they were not very deep. But nobody had ever taught us that we could swim overhanded like that. We didn't know that. So all I know is this. I thought that's the only way you could swim. Well, before you could go overseas to the Marine Corps, you must be a qualified swimmer. And you have to swim the pool. Thing seemed to me like it was 1.5 miles long, but you got to swim a pool twice. You got to go down and back, and down and back. First time, I had no problem. At least I'm doing pretty well. Then he told me, go again. And the second time coming back, I really did not think I was going to make it because my arms were just absolutely worn out. We didn't know to kick our feet and do all that stuff. Nobody ever told us that. So it's a little misnomer. I could swim, but barely. But I didn't want to go in the Navy because if they dropped me in the middle of the ocean, I knew I wouldn't get home. Way back there.
Did you have any interactions with the code talkers?
No, I did not. No, never. If they existed on EWO in the area, I never saw them. Okay? You had another one back here. Yes, sir.
Sir, how did they pick you out to carry that 70-pound gas can on your back? That flamethrower.
How did they what?
How did they pick you out to carry that big gas can on your back?
Oh, that's very simple. You are in this outfit. Yeah. You. That's a volunteer. I mean, you don't say, oh no, I don't want to go.
Because you're the biggest guy there, I'm sure, right?
Right. You don't say that to your sergeant. Oh no, I don't want to do that. You better not say that. You're in trouble. So it was a volunteer kind of thing. Before they selected me as a flamethrower demolition guy, I was a BAR-man, a Browning automatic rifleman, and that was my principal job. But they needed 6 individuals plus a corporal, and I was a corporal. All the others were PFCs and privates. They needed a corporal to be in charge of the unit. Then we had a gunnery sergeant who was in charge of everybody. So they just picked me and 6 other guys, and there we were.
Were you on the first landing, or did you come in about 9:30, 10 o'clock?
The 4th and 5th Marine Divisions, there were 3 divisions involved, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And each one of those had 20,000 Marines. The 4th and 5th divisions were scheduled to land first, to hit the island first. We were, as a 3rd division, in reserve. And on the way to EWO, when we left Guam, we had no idea where we were going. They did not tell us where we were going until we got aboard ship. Once we got aboard ship and out in the ocean, we couldn't give any secrets away to the Japanese, so it was okay to tell us then. Yeah. They told us that we were going to a little island called Iwo Jima. And they brought out a board of some kind. We didn't have plywood at that time, but we did have a board. And they had drawn an outline of what Iwo Jima looked like. And if you use a little imagination, it really does look a little bit like a pork chop. And whether they mentioned pork chop or not, I have no idea. But they did tell us that it was a small island, that the mileage or distance was 2.5 miles wide and 5 miles long. And those of us who had been on Guam a year before, where the beach lines were 19 miles apart, from where we hit to where we ended, it was 19 miles. So 2.5 miles and 5 was nothing. And some of us couldn't figure out, why would you take that little piece of island and why would you need so many people? You know, we had no intelligence on the island. We did not know that they had 22,000 Japanese soldiers on that island. We did not know that they had, depending on who's writing the story, somewhere between 14 and 19 miles of tunneled out in Mount Suribachi and underground. We didn't know that. We did know, basically, or had some great idea of how many pillboxes. Everybody know what a pillbox is? Okay. What a pillbox, or how many were on the island. But many of them, even aircraft couldn't see them because they were buried back in the sand, and they'd piled sand on top of them as a protective measure for artillery and mortars, so that when it came in, it didn't really hit the concrete, it hit sand. So we didn't know exactly how many pillboxes they had. Later years, they indicated that there were 800 pillboxes, small and large, on the island. That was one of the main defenses that Kuribayashi set up to protect his island. All the bombing that we did was something like 173 days that we bombed that island before we got there. Didn't do any damage to the troops because they were underground. And when they would hear the planes coming and the sirens would go off, and they had sirens, they'd all scoot underground and the bombs didn't do anything. So the pillboxes were, and he built these purposely thick with reinforced bars in them. We call it rebar today. Back in those days, we just called it an iron bar. But with a lot of that in it so that artillery or bazookas that we had, those things wouldn't do any damage to it. Wouldn't break it open for sure. So that was one of the big problems, that they would get inside and they had all the protection. We had none. They are confined in something that protects them, and they're firing out through an aperture that's in the front of the pillbox that covered the whole front of the pillbox. But it was only about 8 inches, maybe 10 inches in height. So they could stick their rifles out that aperture, or their Nambus, machine guns, and they would have a whole field of fire out here. But as far as we were concerned, our only target, was that little aperture. So unless we could fire or hit in that area, they were rather safe in there. And that's why the flamethrower became such an essential tool. That was the only way we could get to them. So whether we knew that before we left Guam, I have no idea. I don't know. We had flamethrowers on Guam when we arrived there the August before, or July before, and we had flamethrowers with us, but we were in jungle warfare and jungle territory almost all of Guam, so we didn't use flamethrowers. And there's so much coral on Guam that just digging a hole for a foxhole was a problem. So flamethrowers were never used. After the first day, I carried one for the first day for, I don't know, a few hours, and then we got rid of them. But there was no place to use them. So we became just a plain rifleman from that point on. But Iwo Jima was not much different than other islands, Okinawa or Saipan, Tinian. Wasn't much difference. I've always said that the thing that made Iwo Jima so different was the fact that it was the first enemy territory that we were going to capture. All the other islands that we had taken belonged to some other country. They didn't even belong to Japan. They had captured them and occupied them, but they did not own the land. Iwo was part of their domain. So that was the first enemy territory we were going to take. Most of us in the lower ranks of the Marine Corps still had no idea why we were taking the island. They didn't tell us that they were going to use it as a, for B-29s and fighter planes to protect the B-29. They didn't tell us any of that stuff. We didn't know that. We didn't even know you could have an airfield. We knew they had one, but they were all fighter planes, basically. They only had one completed, another one in the process, pretty near completed, and then the third one they had started. But none of that information was shared with the lower rank of individuals of the Marines. So we had no real knowledge of why we were taking that little island. When we arrived there, my division was way out in the ocean aboard ship. We couldn't see anything at all. We could hear explosions occasionally, and once in a while we'd see an airplane, fighter plane primarily, go flying by. But other than that, we had no information of what was taking place. I didn't know, and I think I can speak for the most of us in my group, we didn't know that 40,000 Marines had landed there the first day. And we didn't know anything about the black sand that made it difficult to dig a hole and to run or move in. None of that information was shared with us. We're still sitting out there thinking, we're not going to get off ship, because that's basically what they told us. And they said that here again on the way, that probably the campaign would last 3 to 5 days. We were reserved in the event we would be needed, but there was no anticipation that we would. Here again, not knowing that they had 22,000 soldiers on the island. We had no intelligence, none of that. So, midnight after the first day, the loudspeaker on the ship announced that we are getting off the ship at 0500, chow 0300. So we go to chow, gear up, put on our stuff before daylight, and the waves at that time were running 10 to 12 feet. So the ship was always moving, not much the big ship. So we had to, rather than go down a gangplank, we had to go down ropes. And we had trained on going down ropes. They drop a rope over the side of the ship, and it's about 12 feet wide, and 5 or 6 Marines all at the same time go down. And they told us, do not hold on to the horizontal rope. Hold on to the vertical. Because if you're going down and somebody steps on your hands, all their weight's on your hands, you're hooked. So go down this way. Okay. All of us, I think, obeyed that. But we couldn't see the Higgins boats that were at the bottom of the rope. Had some Navy individuals in the Higgins boat, the guy that drives it and 2 or 3 other individuals. Their job at that point in time was to make sure that the rope that had dropped over the side stayed in the boat. That's pretty important. Yeah. So we so happened to have at that moment in time 2 gunnery sergeants. Normally you only have 1 gunnery sergeant to a company. But we had a gunnery sergeant. His name was Albert Daniel Hershel. He was what we called a China Marine. China Marines were the toughest Marines I have ever been around. I thought I was tough. I'm a wimp compared to them. He was a pretty good sized guy, about 6'2", and he'd been in China in the early or in the middle 30s, and that's why we called them China Marines. And a little sideline, he and a couple other Marines had gone out one weekend pass, and he imbibed a little more than he should, so he passed out. And his two buddy Marines are carrying him back to the barracks. In China, there's a lot, in those days, tattoos. Well, we're competing right now. We may beat China in tattoos. But there were a lot of tattoo shops back at that time. They're going by with this tattoo shop. And they're also pretty well looped up, but they said, let's take him in here and get him a tattoo. Okay, they take him in, he's passed out. Lay him down there on the table, and those days they used needles, you know. And so they asked these two guys, what do you want on him? Well, there's all kinds of photos or pictures of some kind around. They said, we want a majorette. Started right there, ended right here. And started right there and ended right here. They covered his whole chest with a majorette. Tassels, baton, everything. Took him back to camp, and when he woke up the next morning, he couldn't move because all those scabs, you know. Well, he got away with it somehow, but that is a court-martial offense, by the way, in the Marine Corps. But anyway, he got away with it, probably because he was a gunnery sergeant. But when he would get a little looped, and all we had was 3.2 beer. Now, it took a lot of 3.2 beers to get looped. You had to drink a bunch of them. But every once in a while, he'd get enough. People would give him their beers just to encourage him. And he would finally get enough that he would get out into the company street, and he'd make that thing march. What a circus. And it looked pretty good. But that morning, they're going to show we, lower rank, how they're going down the ladder first. They are in charge. The other guy's name was Showalter. They're both, just the two of them now, going down the ropes, and these Navy guys are holding the rope in the Higgins boat. The boat's going up and down, quite naturally, and at one point it goes way up, and when it comes down, these sailors are hanging on to it, so it just flips both of those guys clear off the rope. One of them goes clear over the Higgins boat, and the other one goes down just in front of the Higgins boat. Well, we had packs on our backs, we had canteens on our hips, and some of us had ammunition strung around our shoulders. They did not. But one of them, the next boat down caught him as he floated by. But the Hershel, they got him right quick and rescued them. But they didn't get ashore until 2 days later. You talk about a hard time for them. Look at our illustrious leaders. Don't even know how to get out a rope. Yep. We got in those boats. As I said, the waves were running very high. And we had what the Navy called a rendezvous area. That Higgins boats, 10, 12, 15 of them, would all get into one area and they'd start circling. And then there would be another group over here circling and so forth. But those were the waves, what they called eventually the waves that are going to hit the beach all at the same time. When they're called to come in, all of them lined up in one line and all of them go at one time. So that's what we're doing. We're just circling, waiting for the beach master, who is a Navy guy, ashore to tell the Navy people, bring the boats in. Well, that didn't happen. We rode those things all day long because the Marines ashore had not been able to capture enough ground yet to permit us to come in behind them. There was no place to land. The commanding general of Iwo Jima worked his plan different than any other island. Now, he was educated in some of our best universities in the United States. So he knew our strategy as well, probably, as we did. Every other island that we had hit, as we would approach the island, they had their defense set up to shoot you while you're still in the water. If you can't get ashore, you can't capture us. You can't capture my island unless you can get on it. So their objective was, don't let them on. And that's why we lost so many people in the water. This guy said, just reverse that. Let them come ashore. Let them come in. All of them. Now we're talking about in this 2.5-mile wide island, and really it wasn't that long for a landing beach because some of it you couldn't land on. It was a cliff and rocks, and Mount Suribachi was, you couldn't land where it came out to the water edge. So the beach area of landing was certainly less than 2.5 miles. But let them come in. Once they get ashore, then they can't escape. The boats are gone. That's why we had so many casualties the first day. Because as soon as they got ashore, and there was light defense until they got ashore. Then the defense got heavy, so they couldn't advance, and there was no place to go. The guy was pretty smart. Well, when that happened, and they announced midnight, we're going in, and we get into the boats, we ride those things all day long. I'd never been seasick until then. I've said, I don't know whether it was the waves that made me seasick or somebody puked on me. Because everybody was. It was just a horrible, horrible day. But we never reached a point where they had enough ground to permit us to come in, so we had to go back and go aboard the ship again at night, spend another night, go through the same routine the next morning. And I've said, I think our outfit was the only outfit in the United States Marine Corps that has had steak and eggs twice in a row. I've never figured out why they fed us steak and eggs either, because we never got steak and eggs any other time. There must be something there. I don't know what it is. But it wasn't the Marines, in my estimation, my humble opinion, that really made Iwo Jima. It was Old Glory. We raised a flag on every island in the Pacific as soon as we got enough ground to where we could put a flagpole up and put a flag out. That was customary, routine. But in Iwo Jima's situation, Old Glory, for the very first time since December the 7th, 1941, was going to fly on enemy territory. That said, not only to us, not only to we Marines, but it said to America. When that appeared on the front page of almost every newspaper in this country, that said to America, we are winning. And up until that time, there was some doubt as to whether we could actually take Japan with their numbers and the method that they used to train. You know, every teenage boy and almost every lady was given some kind of a weapon, if they were physically able, to use to protect the homeland. So we would have, had we been required to land, and my division was scheduled to go to Kyushu, but had we been required to land, it would have been horrible because women and children would have had to been part of our war, which had never been done before. I'm not quite sure how I would have handled that. Another male human being attempting to kill me is different than a lady. And the way we were raised, in my era of time, in the 30s, we were taught that women were very special people. Absolutely. And, we just treated women differently than any other person. We wouldn't hug another lady unless she was a girlfriend or your mother. You didn't even hug sisters. You didn't do that. I don't know why, but that just wasn't the custom. So it would have been, I don't know. I've often wondered, and I'm thankful we didn't have to find out. I've often wondered, could Marines have really handled that? Because all of us were from the same era. It would have been tough, really would. So, after Iwo Jima, well, let me, before I get to after, I've been asked many, many times about using a flamethrower. And in fact, it was said to me just this morning that you're walking around with tanks on your back ready to explode. Well, that's a misnomer. Really it is. Although the tanks had diesel fuel and high octane airplane gasoline in them, a mixture, they were so thick, the metal was so thick and round, that to actually get a hit to where it would explode was, I think, impossible. We tried it. Because we were just a little leery about that too, You got that thing hanging on your back with all that gasoline in there. We set it out in the field and shot at it with M1 rifles and 30 caliber machine guns to try to penetrate the metal in those tanks to get it to explode. Well, they would ricochet off because you couldn't get a good solid hit. Now you could shoot the hose. It had a rubber hose that hooked to the flamethrower that went to the gun that controlled your releasing of your flame and fluid. You could shoot that hose into, penetrate it, and of course, once you lose your pressure, it's useless. You got to have pressure all the way through or nothing happens. So you could do that, and it was useless, but it wouldn't explode. Fire, possible. Never happened to me, so I don't know that it could really happen, but possible. So it wasn't an explosive piece of equipment. It was just heavy, 70 pounds, and they always picked basically short guys for flamethrower operators. But a short guy is a little less target than somebody 6'6" or so. Yet my assistant was 6'6". Vernon Waters was my assistant, and although he had been trained in the basics of flamethrower, his principal job was to assist the operator, filling the flamethrower, making sure that we have enough of the equipment to make the thing operate, like we had the Bakelite cylinders that set the fuel on fire as it left the gun. He and I both would fill our pockets with those things because we only have 5 of the matches, we called them matches, in this little cylinder, and once you use those up, that one has to be replaced. So we'd stick those things in our pockets so we'd always have extras. And he had to carry everything that I couldn't carry. My pack, my bedroll, my extra canteens, My extra ammunition, I had a .45 on my hip. That was the common weapon that you had to carry if you had a flamethrower. In case your flamethrower gave out and you still had an enemy there, how are you going to kill him? Well, you're going to use your .45. I could throw a rock and hit something easier than I could shoot that .45. But you had to carry it anyway. But Vernon and I were very close. He was a Montanan, and we just got put together for whatever reason. Well, Vernon was he was a gentle giant. Kindest fellow you'd ever see in your life. He and I were sitting in a tent on Guam one day and probably talking about home and family and all that sort of thing. I don't remember any of that, but the thing I remember is I had a little ring that my girlfriend, back in my day, we didn't have fiancés. We didn't know what that word meant. Fiancé, what's that? We had girlfriends. So I had a girlfriend, and just before I was leaving for the Marine Corps, she went to G.C. Murphy's 10-cent store. Most of you never heard of G.C. Murphy's. But everything was basically 10 cents. And she went to the 10-cent store, and she bought a wee little ring with a wee little ruby in it. A little bigger than a pinhead, but not much. Wasn't as big as a good-sized pea, but it was red. Her first name was Ruby. Now, she didn't know a thing about psychology, and I knew less. But she, on one of my dates to her house, she gave me that ring. Of course, we had the date that I'm going to leave for the Marine Corps. And she said, I want you to wear this, and every time you look at that ruby, you think of me. Psychologically, it worked. I didn't know what psychology was, but if that's what it is, it worked. And I would think about going out on Saturday night. No. Well, it worked. So we were engaged all the time I was in the Marine Corps. Vernon's dad, well, they were wheat raisers up in northern Montana, and Vernon's dad gave him a ring. And it was a big ring. It was a big square ring. It had a beautiful scene in it, a little lake with trees around it, beautiful. And it was made out of good stuff. It didn't turn his finger green. Mine turned my finger green, because it was just plain metal. You know. But we were sitting there, and we made a pact. I have no idea which one proposed it, but we did agree that if anything happens to either one of us, in my case, I don't make it, he's to get the ring off my finger and send it back to Ruby. His case, I'm to send it to his dad. We shook hands. In my day, you didn't have to have things notarized. When you shook hands and agreed to something, that was it. You know. So we shook hands. That was a pact. We got to Iwo Jima. And we're in advance, we're in the battle. And we were advancing, running, hitting the deck, hit the deck. And I slid into this kind of a hole to try to get some protection. And got hit in the leg with a piece of shrapnel. Called the corpsman. He came, took care of me. But at that time, Vernon Waters came running by me. And just in front of me a few feet, he got hit with the motor. I ran to him. Well, I'm not quite sure I ran, but I got to him and checked him, and of course, he was gone. But he was stretched out, sort of like this. There's that ring. That pact came back. got to get that ring. In the Marine Corps, they told us over and over, you take anything off of the body of a dead Marine, it is a court-martial offense. You do not do that. There was that pack, so I tried to pull that ring off. And of course, we hadn't had any water or baths or anything else for days, so I really couldn't get it off. So I spit on it. With my saliva, I was able to work the ring off. But that ring had been on that finger for 2.5 years in the Pacific, in the sun, every day. So it was as white as white. That would say something to anybody that would look at it. There was something there, now it isn't. So I got some sand and I rubbed on it, and that didn't do much good. So I got some more sand and spit in it and made a little bit of mud, and I put that on it. It kind of dulled the brightness of the white anyway. And I stuck it in my pocket and went on. Campaign was over. We get back to Guam, and I write to his folks and tell them I have the ring, but I'm not going to mail it. I'm going to bring it to you when I get home. I was leery about mailing it for somebody finding it or capturing it. You know, it was a beautiful ring. So I kept it until I got home. I got it in November 1945 and married just in October before I got out. So my wife and I are working on how am I going to do this? I don't have any money, don't have a car. How am I going to do this? Montana in 1945 was a long ways away. 2-lane highways, if any. So we decided probably have to take a bus, ride bus to Montana. Of course, we could look at a map and we could tell how far it was. We at least knew the basic mileage. But a friend who had sort of taken me in when I came home, my father was already dead, my 2 brothers were still in the military, so I don't have anybody. I don't have anybody that I feel like I can talk to. We didn't have PTS back in our day. We had the condition, but we didn't have the name. We had no counselors, no medical facilities, no psychiatrists, no social workers. So you pretty well had to handle your own situation. But this guy sort of took me in like a son and began inviting us and taking us to places and taking us out to dinner and inviting him, my wife and I, to his home and that sort of thing. He had a 1942 red Dodge convertible. 1942. Now, he had not been able to get tires during the war because he was not in a war program. He sold cars, but that wasn't war. So the tires were all worn out. You always had to carry a spare in the back in case you have it flat, and you had lots of flats. So, but he told me, you can have the use of my car, that convertible, to take that ring back. Because I had told him the story, and how am I going to get there with no money and no car and anything else? He said, take my car. Okay. So Ruby and I get in that car, and we take off from Montana. And we only had 2 flat tires going out there. That wasn't bad. But we finally arrived. Took us 3 days of long, hard driving. It was 14, 15 hours a day. And we made it. And I delivered that ring to his dad. You would have thought I was giving him Fort Knox. Because his personal effects had already been received. But naturally they knew I had the ring because I had told them that. But when they finally received the ring, that's what was the icing on the cake. I've always been very, very proud of the fact that I could do that, because it is the little things sometimes in life that have so much more meaning than something great because of its personal relationship with you. I'm going to close with a story from a paper somebody else is writing. In dealing with Gold Star families, most of us, I am sure, have heard many, many times the term Gold Star mother. So having said that, let me ask the question, and I'd like to see a show of hands. If you had a relative of any degree, any time in the history of America, back from the days of starting here or there, that sacrificed their life in the armed forces, that they died while they were serving America in the armed forces, if you had a relative of any degree, would you please just raise your hand? Thank you very much. Could the rest of us thank them for their sacrifice? Out of this group, there was about 20. And that's probably pretty normal. Probably so. But most of us, as we have gone through life and past and present, we've probably never heard anybody use the term Gold Star Dad. I'm guilty. About 15 years ago, because of some of those incidents in life, I felt we needed something in the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., that would honor Gold Star mothers, which was the only term at that time that we were using or that I knew. I had never heard the term Gold Star Dad or relative of or Gold Star families. Those words, those terms had never been expressed. So for about 15 years I had an artist help me come up with a concept of what he and I thought would be an appropriate tribute and honor to Gold Star mothers in Washington. And I carried that thing with me wherever I'd go, and if I'd find somebody that I thought had a little bit of money, or a lot of money, I'd approach them, try to entice them to put some money into it. I failed. I'm a poor salesman. I'm glad I didn't have to make my living selling, so I couldn't sell it. So I gave up. Thought it's not going to work. Tried to get one in West Virginia, because if I can't get it in Washington, maybe we can get it in West Virginia, because on our memorial in Charleston, West Virginia, we have 11,424 names inscribed, and every one of those individuals had to sacrifice their life at the hands of an enemy in order to have their name on that wall. Those who died any other way for years were not identified on that memorial. So we finally got that corrected, but we wanted to do something to pay tribute and honor to those relatives of those individuals. So that's where the first Gold Star Family Memorial Monument started. And it was to pay tribute to the loved ones all the way back in our history who gave somebody, a relative, to keep us free and who we are. This is a father And after his son is killed, he writes these words, as if he were writing to his son who still was living. Dear Matt, this is how it's been since you left us. Our son, and how it is today. It was Monday, December 11, 2006, 7:30 p.m. There was a knock at the door, and it must be UPS, I thought, delivering the Marine Corps flag that you promised to send us for Christmas. At the door, not UPS, but two Marines in dress blues. Are you, and his name, father of Corporal Matthew Vincent Dillon? Immediately I knew why they were there. I wanted to scream, no, go away. But I whispered, yes. We regret to inform you, but before he could finish, I asked, is our son dead? He continued, we regret to inform you that your son was killed in action today in Iraq. Again, I ask, hoping for a different answer. There must be some mistake. Are you sure? They met me with quiet expressions of regret and the general warning that we should not cling to hope. There was no mistake, he said. How can I tell you how much like death was life at that instant? I remember picturing you as clearly as ever I have seen you, in all the ways that I've seen you, as a tiny infant drooling on my shoulder, as a toddler taking your first uncertain steps, as a little leaguer straining to get a hit. I saw you growing, a man blooming with pride in your Marine Corps uniform, so strong and tough and yet openly sentimental. And I thought, you, Matt, dead? It was preposterous, a lie. Yet there was your mother, waving before me as the wreckage of a woman is when she had lost her child, and I could lay hold of nothing to fend off her pain. The agony was unbearable, crippling. I was unable to take her in my arms or even to speak to her. Time passed before I could react enough to gather in Mom. I held her like a broken doll. In my arms, she fell into a quivering panic, and it was as though she grasped as she would be living out her days of sad, empty house. How could she or I have outlived you when you were meant to outlive us? That's why we're in this, because we have never in America paid tribute and honor to those individual situations that happen over and over. It's still happening today. We lost a soldier yesterday. And we as Americans just sort of take this as granted. We really never stop long enough to think of the sacrifice and the heartache and grief that goes with losing a loved one when they're in the armed forces. It's different when they're with us. It's different when nature and time and God takes over the life of that individual. There is no comparison between that and that sacrifice for somebody else. Thank you very much. We appreciate you.